from your table meetings. So think about that big, bright idea. We'll send an email out so you can garner some good that and we'll continue to go from good to great. Okay. Speaking of great, right? We have the great Katie Spada with us. Yeah, let's give her a round of applause. For those of you that don't know Katie, elite level athlete in artistic swimming, college national teamer, dietitian, and now works in the nutrition field in medical sales. Most importantly, she's one of us. And she's going to talk to you about nutrition. I think for many of us, we know it's important, but do we really know what it means? We know what it means for our athletes. We know what it means for individual athletes. This is a learning that we're doing every day at the national team level. So I know that it's a challenge at the club level. Athletes will get this information from Katie too, as she'll present to them later. So hopefully you guys can marry those two conversations together and get better. Katie, take it away.
All right, thank you, Adam. I'm gonna go ahead and try to project. Can everyone in the back hear me okay? Yeah. Yes, amazing. If you can't or I start to trail off, just go ahead and flag me down. Let me get a couple of things out of the way first. I am 21 weeks pregnant, and one of my really fun pregnancy symptoms is I get out of breath. My husband thought that was really ironic, coming to an artistic swimming convention. So if I take a pause to collect myself, it's just this baby, it's not my oxygen. But I'm really excited to be here once again. It's been 4 years since I've been able to speak at convention on a topic that is so near and dear to my heart, specific to a sport that influenced my life in so many ways. So a little bit about me. I feel like I recognize a lot of faces in the room. You guys have seen me grow up from the age of 11 to 22, but there are some people in here that I don't recognize. So I'm excited to introduce myself. I was an artistic swimmer for 11 years. I started a little bit later at the age of 11. I was on 3 U.S. national teams, the first 13-15 teams back in 2008. 2009 and 2010 junior teams before I went on to swim for the Ohio State University.
Go fast.
Yeah, wait. Where I ultimately ended my career, retired, and then moved on to become a registered dietitian. And in my professional career so far, I've earned my master's degree from Northeastern University in sports and fitness, specifically sports and fitness nutrition. Started my, cut off at the bottom a little bit, that's right. Started my company, Spada Strong Nutrition LLC, where I focus on helping athletes and retired athletes develop a healthy relationship with food and their body, not only for sport, but for life after sport as well. And then as Adam mentioned, I recently pivoted from a clinical career at the hospital into medical sales, and I currently work in medically tailored meals in the Medicaid beneficiary space, which has definitely kept me on my toes over the last couple of months. So where we're going to go today, why nutrition, why even care about it, artistic swimming specific research. While there's not a ton, there is some, and it can help us shape how we're educating and sharing nutrition with our athletes. Those nutrition foundations that you can take back to your club teams, your colleges, how you're influencing athletes so that they're getting solid nutrition education, because as coaches, who are that front line? Not every athlete is going to have access to a registered dietitian. And so being fueled, unintended, with that information can be really helpful. We're going to talk about Red S and the nutrition risks. Artistic swimming is at significant risk for Red S, which is relative energy deficiency of sport. We'll talk about the research there. And then my goal, because I can talk quite a bit, is to give plenty of time for questions at the end, because nutrition is complex. It doesn't have to be, it can be pretty simple and straightforward, but the challenge is we have a lot of outlets that give us information or misinformation, and it can muddy the waters when we're thinking about nutrition. So if there are any burning questions you have, I'm happy to answer those. So why nutrition? I like to think of it as the training hierarchy, and this can be applied to our life in general. Nutrition really is the foundation for everything. Mental health, physical health, emotional health, our relationships with individuals, our relationship to ourselves. But in the sports world, that's a little small. Hopefully you guys can see it. If not, I can always send out the presentations. But nutrition is the foundation. Without proper fueling, without giving our body the energy it needs, we can't build. The other levels I've identified here are training capacity, We can't increase training capacity if we're not eating enough. We can't recover and regenerate for our next training session if we're not eating enough. We can't improve our skill and strength training if we're not eating enough. And we also can't specialize in our sports if we're not eating enough. And I'll add to that, eating enough of the right things as an athlete, right? When I look at the nutrition hierarchy in general, Ellen Satter created this nutrition hierarchy, and that foundation is eating enough food. If you're not eating enough food, we can't build on that. After that is making sure it's the right combination of macronutrients, carbs, fats, proteins. Then we go to micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. Then we can go to supplements, and finally we can go to all the different timing and details and branched chain amino acids and all of those additional things. But without that foundation, we can never get there. So I took a deep dive into what is currently out there in artistic swimming specific nutrition education. And as you can imagine, there is not a ton, but there are some research papers that can drive how we present nutrition and how we educate nutrition for our athletes. But we can't do that without addressing this. And this came out of a study from 2018, the complexities of nutrition in artistic swimming. I'm going to just read what the quote is from the study. Many artistic swimmers have eating anxiety, fear that eating appropriate foods and beverages will negatively alter their body composition and increase body mass. So the challenge that we're already faced with before we even start talking carbs, fats, proteins, a lot of athletes are fearful to eat in general. They're worried how it's going to impact their body from a negative way, instead of viewing food as this positive thing that can enhance their training, improve their outcomes, improve their performance, and also the enjoyability of their sport. So that's always important to keep in the background when we're messaging on nutrition, is that we're already starting with fear in a majority of the artistic swimming community. And that's similar to gymnastics, figure skating. Any aesthetic sport is at risk for this. So key things from the research overview. We do actually have one study, and I'll give the details on that on the next slide, about the energy requirements. They did it on Japanese elite synchronized swimmers, artistic swimmers. I knew I was going to slip it some. It's gonna happen again. Yes. Can I use the mic? Yeah. Maybe. Try again. Try again.
Yes.
It's garbling,
It's garbly,
but it's better than.
But it's louder.
it's louder. If I pull it down, is that better?
Yes.
Alright, figured out the trick. Alert me if I change direction or level and it doesn't sound as clear. So this research that was done, they used a doubly labeled water method, which is a way to assess energy needs, and it was done on Japanese elite synchronized artistic swimmers. It's gonna happen again. And on the next slide, I'll show you what those results actually showed. But so we do have one study that highlights energy needs in artistic swimmers. Now, the challenge here is a small study, so there's not a large population. It's one single study, so we can't really attribute it to the entire artistic swimming athlete community, but it gives us a baseline. The second thing is the unique physiological demands. Artistic swimming is unlike any other sport in the world, we know that. It requires a level of anaerobic capacity that most sports never even have to consider. And so our energy needs are different than other athletes. And the challenges here too is that our practices and our training is so varied. Sometimes we could be expending so much energy, but we know that artistic swimmers are very efficient in the water. And so when they're egg metering, it's kind of like the average person just walking. So how do we assess the energy needs there and the differences in intensity throughout practices? The health concerns is something that is often brought up in the research, and we'll address that throughout the presentation as well. Things like developing the risk of eating disorders, delayed menarche, menstrual dysfunction, the risk of bone mineral density challenges, osteoporosis as we age, fertility challenges. There's a significant risk here, and that can't be ignored when we're talking about nutrition. And then the fact that there are research gaps, because we don't have a lot of opportunity to study. The population from a sports perspective and an athlete community is still smaller. Funding, I'm sure money is always a stressor at the club level. At the research level, there's not really funding for research there as well. So there are a lot of gaps that we have to pull information in from other studies. And then having been an artistic swimmer myself, I try to apply what I know from a physiological perspective to the research that is out there for artistic swimmers specifically. So what did that study on the Japanese elite artistic swimmers find? It found that the average energy expenditure on moderate training day, moderate intensity, was 2,738 calories with a standard deviation of 672. What does that mean? Well, that means, that artistic swimmers can have anywhere from around 2,100 calories for an energy need, all the way up to 3,400. That's a huge range. But I know for sure, from personal experience and then also just talking with my fellow teammates, that most of us were not even eating anywhere near a number 2 in front of it. Number 1, primarily. And what this research shows is that's too little. That's not enough for moderate, not even high intensity, but moderate training. The estimation for carbohydrates is 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight, and the emphasis is on timing. We'll talk about timing carbohydrates and why that's so important. And I have an example of what that looks like, 5 to 7 grams per kilogram. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? But that's how many carbs are needed. And I know that carbs are often the first thing to go when we start having fear and anxiety around food, and yet it's one of the most important foundations for an athlete, including artistic swimmers. That breathlessness thing is happening. Okay, protein. Protein is having a spotlight moment. Cottage cheese is also having a moment in social media world right now. Protein is so important, at the tune of 1.5 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of protein per day for artistic swimmers. Now, I've heard 1 gram per pound, too much. Way too much. We need to do it based off of kilograms primarily, or if you think about that, kilograms are about 2.2 per pound, we divide it in half. So average estimation is gonna be about 90 to 110 grams of protein per day. Most late teen and adult artistic swimmers are gonna be way more than that. We don't need 130 to 140 grams of protein in a day. That is not appropriate, and it's oftentimes taking away from other essential nutrients that are needed. Fat, we need about 20 to 25% of our daily calorie needs from fat, and fat is often a forgotten macronutrient in the world of artistic swimming, actually just in sports in general. We think about carbs, the carb loading, and speed swimming, and running, and all those other sports. We think about protein to build muscle, but fat plays such an important role, especially for female athletes. And while the male artistic swimming community is growing, which is very exciting to see, it is still predominantly a female sport. And without enough fat, we end up with a lot of hormone disruptions. We end up with delayed cell signaling. Our brain fires based on fat that lines the neurotransmitters that are sending. So we need fat. It also allows us to absorb micronutrients. And so without fat, we're putting ourselves at nutrition risk. And then talking about micronutrients, because adequate energy intake is often not met in the artistic swimming world, we're at risk for micronutrient deficiencies as well. Calcium, iron, vitamin D, magnesium. And so sometimes supplementation is appropriate. Sometimes it's just making sure we're eating enough. And then GI upset. This is another thing that pops up in the research. Artistic swimming is unique because we're right side up, we're upside down, we're tumbling and turning, and if you're not eating the right things before a practice, that can sit really heavy and make some GI upset worse. So having strategies on what to eat before, so you still have energy, but not what's gonna cause GI upset and running to the bathroom, can be really helpful as well. So when we're talking artistic swimming or synchro-specific nutrition. I really loved the alliteration there, synchro-specific nutrition needs. This is the estimated carbohydrate needs for an average athlete who weighs 125 pounds. Convert that into kilograms, 56.8 kilos a day. Multiply that by 5 to 7 grams per kilogram. That gives us 284 to 398 grams per day. I went on the lower end for the visual example. 300 grams, 20 slices of bread. I can't even imagine eating 2 slices of bread when I was an athlete, if I'm being totally honest with you. Cause that freaked me out. But this is throughout the whole day. Now remember, not all carbs are created equal. We've got potatoes that are gonna have a higher carbohydrate density, bananas, rice, quinoa, lots of things that we can include in there. But just for a visual representation, on an average day, this is the number of carbohydrates, excuse me, that an athlete needs. Artistic swimming specifically. And it could be more. If you have a really high energy need athlete, it could be more, closer to that 400. But this is what 300 grams would look like. So what are those nutrition foundations? How can we make sure we are supporting our athletes and getting the information that they need so that they're not crashing during practice, at risk for injury, or potentially lifelong challenges from a health perspective because of underfueling? And something we'll talk about is that underfueling can be intentional. Athletes can intentionally restrict, or it can be unintentional just because of a lack of knowledge. They may not know that they're not eating enough. They may not know that they need to have X amount or choose this type of carbohydrate before practice. So it's not always an intentional decision to try and alter their body. Sometimes it's just lack of knowledge. So before showing up to practice, before showing up to the pool, what should an athlete eat? Well, this is kind of where the balance goes out the window and the focus is on carbohydrates. The reason we want those more simple carbohydrates is because it's not going to sit heavy in our stomach. When we eat things that are high in protein, fat, and fiber, necessary, absolutely. Timing, not before practice. When you have protein, fat, and fiber sitting in your stomach, blood is going to be rushing into your stomach to help with digestion because they are high energy demands for digesting those foods. Well, we don't need blood rushing to our stomach during practice. We need blood going into our legs, into our arms, into our muscles so that we're able to perform. So instead, we want to focus on things like fruit, toast, oatmeal, applesauce, bananas, granola bars, specifically granola bars, not protein bars. The other challenge with protein bars is they're often filled with sugar alcohols. Sugar alcohol is a really good way to get yourself in the bathroom, especially as an athlete. So being aware of what type of bar or smoothies. Smoothies can be great as well because they assist with hydration. And we'll talk about hydration and how that is a challenge for aquatic athletes in general. But focusing on those carbohydrates is the goal before we show up. So we want to have, if I were to give kind of something specific, 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates. You can add in a small amount of protein for sustainability 1 to 2 hours before your training. So that could look like peanut butter and jelly sandwich, lighter on the peanut butter. That could look like, my favorite is actually doing like the toaster waffles with not the super high protein Greek yogurt, but putting a little bit of Greek yogurt on top. If an athlete is coming right from school, applesauce pouches. I love an applesauce pouch before you walk out onto the pool deck because it's going to be quick, easy digested, it's not going to sit long. So those are just some examples of things that we can encourage our athletes to have before they show up to practice. If an athlete is going from school, for the club sports here specifically, they have lunch at 11 or 12, practices at 4. Maybe they're not eating between because they're going right to practice. Well, now they're going from 12 to 8 without eating anything. And not even if it was just a student that didn't have 4-hour practice, 3-hour practice, 2-hour practice, that's still not okay. And so adding in that intensity from a training session, we want to make sure that they're getting enough to eat. So I know on my club teams, we were often training 3-4 hours. That was kind of standard, 4 to 8, or Saturday mornings, 8 to 12. When our practices are longer than 2 hours, we want to make sure that we're having something during training. It's too long to go without giving our body something more than just water. Water is amazing, I'm here for water, but it doesn't cut it. If you notice that your athletes have a drop off halfway through practice, or they're hitting a wall, you're starting to do run throughs, they're looking really lethargic, floppy, all of those things, those terms and words that we're using, like, oh my gosh, if they clean that, we need to look more crisp. Maybe they need some more food. Now, the challenge with having something during practice are those GI upsets, right? Because now we're at risk for an upset stomach, athletes probably don't want to eat. This is when we can utilize liquid nutrition to our benefit. Something like a Gatorade, a Powerade. If you don't want to use any of those premium ones, you can make one yourself with honey, lemon, and salt. But we want to focus on having some carb source. The reason Gatorade has real sugar in it, it's intentional. It's so that we can get sugar into your muscles and you can have energy. Electrolytes are also important. The challenge with being an aquatic athlete is we can't measure our sweat rate as well. In the sports nutrition world, land athletes, as I'll call them, they'll wear sweat patches that determine what their electrolyte loss is during their training. We can't do that in an aquatic sport. We haven't kind of figured out that technology to know how much are we losing. So we have to be ahead of it and guess. So utilizing something like a Gatorade that does have potassium, sodium, magnesium in it can prevent cramping. I had the worst cramps, calf cramps as an athlete. I didn't have the best toe point. My ankle extension was in. And so I would, gosh, squeeze so hard and I catch cramps every single time. Probably because I was not giving myself any electrolytes during my training and I was getting really depleted. So utilizing something that's more than just water can be really helpful. Sometimes athletes can utilize things like gels or chews or honestly even like fruit snacks. My son's fruit snacks are a great intra-training option. It's quick, easily digestible. It's going to give you that boost. That's where also applesauce pouches or Costco has the big like fruit and veggie squeeze pouches. Those are great. But encouraging your athletes during those longer training sessions to bring something other than just water and notice if you see an energy change in them. And then post-training. So after practice, I mean, you can't really influence what's going on. They're going home, but encouraging them to rebuild, refuel, and replenish. We need carbohydrates to refuel the glycogen, that stored energy in our muscles that's depleted. During our workouts, we're utilizing energy from our blood, so blood sugar is getting pulled into the muscles are getting depleted of that stored energy. We need to replete that. And the only way we can replete that is with carbohydrates. And so encouraging them to have carbohydrates at their dinner, their post-practice snack, whatever it is. This is where optimization comes in. We want to add protein now after we've done the work because our muscles are broken down and we need to make sure that they're getting something to rebuild those muscles. So as an athlete at Ohio State, they always gave us chocolate milk after practice. And I was like, what the heck is with this chocolate milk? I really don't understand. Kind of lactose intolerance, like we're not gonna really do this. But as I learned, it's true. But for any of my lactose intolerant friends, Fairlife. Now, the example I'm gonna give does not line up with Fairlife. Chocolate milk, standard chocolate milk, is the ideal ratio of 3 carbohydrates to 1 protein. In 1 glass of chocolate milk, there's about 24 grams of carbs, 8 grams of protein. That comes out to that 3-to-1 ratio. Science has found that for whatever reason, this ratio tends to optimize muscle synthesis and muscle recovery after training. So that's why the chocolate milk. Now, the reason I say not the Fairlife is because it's ultra filtered, so it's higher protein, lower carb. That has time and a place. You could do that and pair it with a banana to make sure that you're getting some extra, some additional carbohydrates there. But that's why chocolate milk has been touted as the best post-recovery workout, is because of that 3-to-1 ratio. There's also a lot of hype around timing. I say as long as an athlete is getting food in, carbs and proteins, within that 1 to 2 hour block, they're not going a significant amount of time after a training session without getting anything in, then we're doing all right. And then the rehydrate part, that's the third piece of why chocolate milk is so great, is because it also rehydrates. Again, it's really challenging as an aquatic athlete to know how much you're losing. You can't really feel your sweat because you're in the pool, probably cold. So you don't feel like you're hot, you don't feel like you're losing, but you are. And so you do need to rehydrate as well. And this is where water can be great. Ideally, during training, we're utilizing those electrolyte sources, something that's going to be a little bit higher than just water. And then after training, water can be a great option. I want to spend a little bit of time on supplements because the more I work with athletes, the more I hear that we're trying to utilize supplements, maybe more so than we need to. A couple of key things with supplements is that we want to make sure that it's third-party tested. The supplement industry, while it does have regulation, is not very well regulated. And there was a study that came out that showed using protein powders specifically, over 60% of the protein powders that they tested did not have what the label said they had in it. They either had more of something, less of something, ingredients that weren't even listed on there. The composition was not equal to what the label was telling us. And that's because regulation is not really tightly regulated. And so utilizing something, if we are going to utilize a protein powder, which is a very popular choice, and I use a protein powder in my smoothies. I think it's a great, easy, convenient way to optimize my protein needs, especially now that I'm pregnant. But the challenge and the risk there is, what are we putting in our bodies? NSF Certified for Sport is one of the gold standards when it comes to certification. There's also Informed Sport, and recently the Clean Label Project has been a really popular movement to try and get more transparency when it comes to labels. So whether it's a protein powder, electrolyte mixes are really popular right now, liquid IV, elements, scratched, all of them are great and they have purposes for different reasons, but we want to make sure that the choice that we're making is certified, that it's tested, that it's safe for our athletes to be consuming. And especially as we reach up through the elite level, and hopefully some of our athletes land on the national team if that's what they want, or they're going into college, now we run into the risk of drug testing. And it's very possible that an athlete could unknowingly take a protein powder, how innocent, just a protein powder, and test for something they had no idea was in there, it wasn't on the label, and now the athlete is responsible. So even when it comes to my multivitamin, my prenatal, magnesium, whatever it is that you're taking or your athlete is taking, I highly, highly, highly recommend making sure that it is third-party tested. NSF is not just for sport, NSF is for, there is NSF certified for sport specifically, and that's the one that follows like NCAA regulations and all of that. But there's just NSF certification to make sure that what companies are saying is in their product is actually in their product. So double checking that, and then also seeing like, are your athletes taking supplements? More from like a health perspective, one of the leading risks of developing cancer is actually taking unnecessary supplements, because we're exposing ourselves to things that we don't know what is in it. So unless a doctor or a dietitian or someone in their health field or in their medical team is recommending that they take a supplement, I tend to steer away. Now there are times and places for it. If you have a vegetarian athlete or a vegan athlete, you have to be supplementing B12. It just has to happen. Okay, that's one of the most important ones. If you have an athlete who is already at risk for bone mineral density loss, calcium, vitamin D, K2, so there are circumstances where supplements are so helpful. Pregnancy, you have to have a prenatal, right? But we want to make sure that they are certified, they're safe, and what the athlete is putting in their body is not going to unknowingly harm them. Okay, I've talked about the nutrition risks in artistic swimming a lot. We're gonna dive into it a little bit more here. And I sent over my presentations to Adam, and now it's on Google and it's not on the PowerPoint I was using, so it got a little messed up. But this came out of the Robertson and Mountjoy 2018 study, and it said that body shape is not a judged component, right? Technically, it's not. However, there is considerable emphasis on body composition to achieve the desired aesthetic appearance. Due to the sport's aesthetic nature, which prioritizes leanness, the risk of red S, which we'll talk about, or reds, is a concern of this athletic population. So reds, I'm curious, just by show of hands, how many people have heard of reds before? I knew Victoria would. Okay. How many people have heard of the female athlete triad? Okay, a couple more hands. Yeah, basically reds replace the female athlete triad because it's not just a risk factor for females, it's a risk for all athletes. But what reds is, it's relative energy deficiency in sport. And I'll just read the definition. It's a syndrome resulting from an energy deficiency relative to the balance between dietary energy intake and energy expenditure required. So what that means is the amount of energy coming in is not enough to support the energy that's going out. And this is what can happen unintentionally. The thing with sports or working out in general is that it shuts down our hunger mechanisms. It suppresses hunger because when you're utilizing energy for activity like a workout, a run, whatever it is, we don't have time to waste energy on digestion. So we're so usually have that hunger get suppressed. If you've ever noticed that you're more hungry on an off day, or athletes mention that they're more hungry on an off day, that's intentional. The body is so smart. That's purposeful because, oh, I'm not having to conserve energy to put it into my workout. Now I can go ahead and utilize that energy on this off day. I can consume it and actually digest it. And so a relative energy deficiency in sport can happen unintentionally or intentionally. And the risk factors are oftentimes not seen because it can be, I'll talk about this in my presentation at lunch, but it can be something that is seen as dedication. Right? Like, oh, athletes getting in an extra workout, or they're saying no to dessert, or they're saying that they're full. These can either be intentional or unintentional, but they can be risk factors for reds. And what happens if an athlete has reds is it negatively impacts performance. We know that. There can be lifelong consequences, which we'll talk about. And I'll dive into that more actually in my next presentation on some that I personally experienced. They are more common in aesthetic sports, as we know. And like I said, it can be intentional or unintentional. So this is kind of a visualization of how reds can impact an individual. It touches all places of how the body functions. So we know that low energy availability may be a contributor to poor sports performance. This is often due to associated detrimental endocrine effects. So it's impacting our endocrine system, which is how our hormones function, which is how we function as a human. So the way that reds can touch an individual, immunological, if you have that athlete who is sick all the time, constantly not showing up to practice because they're sick, it could be an immunological issue. Our immune cells are built on nutrition. If we don't have enough nutrition, our immune system is not going to be supported. Menstrual dysfunction or fertility issues down the line. It's often touted as a badge of honor for female athletes to lose their period. Oh, they're just fit, right? I was told that from my doctors, oh, you're an athlete from the national team. It's totally fine. Like, it's not a problem. It'll come back when you stop swimming. No. Anytime an athlete loses their period, it's a red flag. Immediate heart stop. So that's the first thing, or the second thing. Bone health. Because an athlete oftentimes loses their period, now we don't have the estrogen to support bone health, and it puts us at risk for osteopenia, osteoporosis now or down the line. And as an aquatic athlete, we're really kind of at risk because we don't have the pounding that helps with bone mineral density development. So even without a nutrition factor, we're already at risk for bone loss. Endocrine dysfunction, so thyroid issues, hair falling out, hormone changes, PCOS is often a diagnosis that a lot of aquatic athletes receive. It may not be PCOS, it might actually just be RED-S, but it can impact the hormones the same way. Metabolic injury, when we don't eat enough chronically, our metabolism has to adjust. Your body wants to survive. It's kind of the purpose, is it needs to survive. And if it's not getting what it needs, it's going to compensate somehow. And usually that ends up in metabolic injury, which gets us into the cycle of I'm eating less and less, and I'm gaining more and more. What the heck is happening? Usually that's metabolic injury. Watching my time here. Hematological, so challenges with red blood cell function, iron. Your red blood cells in your brain are the two things that prefer carbohydrates over any other energy source. And as an aquatic athlete, as an artistic swimmer specifically, we need our red blood cells to be functioning all right, because they're those transporters that bring oxygen to our muscles, and we already know that we have a higher oxygen demand because we're intentionally depriving ourselves of oxygen, which is very helpful in future things like labor. Growth and development, athletes can be stunted if they start restricting from an early age, intentionally or unintentionally, they can stunt their growth. That's a really important piece. And then there's also gastrointestinal, which we've kind of talked about. Cardiovascular, your heart requires a lot of energy to pump. Athletes can have low resting heart rate. That's not always a sign of physical fitness. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a sign of something else. I'm working with an athlete. She was an equestrian athlete, actually, which is really cool. And now she's into running. It's kind of the pipeline, right? Athlete to marathon. But she, right, she consistently had this low heart rate in the 40s, in the 50s, when she was sleeping, even sometimes touching the 30s. And all of her medical providers were saying, well, it's normal, you're an athlete, it's okay. But she was really struggling. Her period wasn't coming, she was really tired all the time, she was cold all the time. Her heart was trying to compensate. When we started to get her to eat more, yes, her heart rate was still lower than the average individual, sitting closer in like the 50s, 60s at night instead of the 40s or 30s. She felt better, she was performing better, her marathon times improved, her hair got thicker, all of these incredible things because we recognized red S. And then psychological. I want to talk about this one just for a minute because in my practice as a dietitian, I've at this point seen hundreds of individuals, a lot of non-athletes, a lot of athletes, and food is more than just physiological. Talk about the physiological because that's a really important piece. The science is so important, but it's also psychological. How you think about food, your interactions with food, if you're comfortable spontaneously going out for food, if food is an important part of your culture, there is more than just what we eat. There's also why we eat. And I'll often say as a dietitian, when we first start working together, I care more about why you're eating something than what you're eating. We can talk about the what you're eating, but if why you're eating isn't in alignment with your values and appropriate for whatever the situation might be, we're not going to get very far. And red S can oftentimes be associated with eating disorders, which are one of the most deadly mental health illnesses that an individual can have to work through in their life. All right. So just some signs and symptoms to look out for in your athletes. If you notice decreased endurance, strength, coordination, this athlete used to always be at the top of their game during land training or during preseason. We're kind of in preseason right now for the artistic swimming world, and you notice the challenge there. There's a performance decrease. Something to think about is red S. If there's an increased injury, this athlete is constantly injured over and over and over again. Could be something to look into their nutrition. If there is those physiological dysfunctions, you hear them say, oh, I never get my period, or, like, yeah, I haven't gotten it in months, like red flag, immediate red flag. It doesn't mean red S, but it does mean something is wrong. If they're having stress fractures, I battled stress fractures not stress fractures, shin splints, but I was at risk for stress fractures my entire college career, which is crazy. Yeah, an aquatic athlete. But that's because the bone mineral density was just not there. Gastrointestinal issues, if athletes are constantly having to run to the bathroom, they're complaining about stomach aches, bloating, that can be a sign as well. And then again, if they're sick often, that impaired immunity is one of the big things as well. If they're irritable, poor concentration, mood changes, thank you. I owe all of my college teammates an apology because I lived the majority of my college career angry, pretty much 24/7. Mood changes, disturbances, and athletes snaps back at you, and you're like, whoa, that's not like this. We all have our sassy athletes, but one that normally doesn't, and now they're getting a little bit moody, that could be an indicator of poor nutrition as well. And then if they're constantly fatigued, you hear them talking about not sleeping well, their parents express any concerns, all things to look at nutrition. What's going on with their nutrition? And then, I know I got the warning, I wanna make sure you guys get plenty of time to ask questions. This is more the clinical side of what we do to support recovery. So there is a lot of science to support recovery, making sure that they're getting enough nutrition in. That is over 45 kcals per kilo of fat-free mass per day is recommended. So we would identify what their fat-free mass is, calculate it based on that. Focusing again on carbohydrates to fuel, to rebuild, but also to manage some of those hormonal disturbances that might be occurring. Including adequate protein. So protein is still important. We bump it up a little bit in REDS recovery, and then ensuring micronutrient efficiency. Oftentimes athletes may need more rest than before in order to heal from a REDS injury. We want to monitor their menstrual cycle. Consistency with the menstrual cycle is so important as a sign and an indicator that an athlete's body is recovered. Addressing those psychological concerns, pairing it with therapy or counseling as necessary. And then supplementation, again, always third-party tested as appropriate. I think that is, these are my resources. I'm very much evidence-based. If I don't know, I'll let you know. If it's one study, I'll let you know. If it's a body of research, I'll also let you know. And thank you guys for your time, for allowing me back to speak. And we have about 5-10 minutes. You guys will have some time before you go to lunch, if there are any questions. Yeah.
I had a couple of scenarios that were all, I had getting to that during practice. And I knew I was checking with nutrition, what they, more practice, all that stuff. And everything turned out to be right. So would that be, which they focus more on their like those practice nutrition?
They were getting the headaches during practice. I would look at,
Like,
did they have enough electrolytes? It could be post what they're eating after. It could be hydration, making sure it's just enough liquid. We don't often get enough liquid in general, and that's one of the first things to go. I'd also have them check their blood pressure at home, just get like a standard blood pressure cuff to make sure there aren't any issues there. Chronically low blood pressure is just as bad as high blood pressure. So that would be the first thing, but it sounds to me like maybe the amount of carbs that they're eating isn't enough. So even if they're having, you know, a slice of toast or apples or whatever it is, they may need more. Especially if it's happening during practice. And then from the electrolyte perspective, even if they're consuming electrolytes, making sure it's the right balance of sodium, potassium, magnesium. Especially magnesium, that one's often forgotten, but that can help with headaches. Yes.
Perfect ratio. At our and practice 9 p.m. And I know like as me, if I have sugar at like right before and I was eating kind of last week and higher sugar. So if there's something that's similar that's like really good or high protein with that spike.
I would actually do like a Greek yogurt parfait with fruit. That would be my recommendation. Yeah, so the question was, after the practice time goes till 9 o'clock at night, so eating after is hard, like if I have something with sugar, like chocolate milk, I'm gonna be up and that disturbs our sleep. Is there something, an alternative that I can have that's not gonna be as high sugar after practice so late at night? Something like a Greek yogurt with fruit would be great, or you can do a banana with peanut butter, something like that, so you're still getting that carb to protein ratio. A turkey sandwich could also be a good option. So it doesn't have to be like, you know, chocolate milk is just what's been studied. And it doesn't have to be that 3-to-1 ratio. The biggest thing with nutrition is consistency over perfection. And in a sport that really drives perfection, that's hard to share with our athletes. So those would be some of my recommendations. Yeah.
I have a question about the 45 calories per
Yes.
fat mass per day.
Yes.
Is that before or after exercise action?
Really, really good question. That's just like
To live.
to live. Yeah. That's to live.
So now I'm gonna ask a follow-up question.
Okay.
Given that,
All right, I'll do my best.
So let's say I'm an artistic swimmer and I weigh 60 kilograms.
Let me do my calculator.
Okay. That would be a document, right? Artistic swim, yeah, about 130 pounds.
Yeah, that's about average.
So 60 kilograms.
Okay,
Let's say I'm about 20% body fat,
okay,
okay? So that means I'm 80% factory mass, right?
yeah,
Okay, you got your calculator up, so.
I got it. So we're 48 kilograms of fat-free mass.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then we're gonna multiply that by 45,
And
right?
also that 45 now.
Okay, what do we get?
That's a minimum of 2160
2160 before you work out.
before you work out. Before you work out. So if the athlete is still working out, they've been diagnosed with REDS, we're doing the 45 calories per kilo of fat-free mass. This is before they work out, if they were just to like sit on their couch all day. So we probably would need, depending on how intense the activity is, if they're still at full practice level, I'd add another 500 to 800, but even closer to that 3,000. And something I'll also mention is that I've had athletes, like, this is an estimation, right? I've had some athletes that we need to be up at the 3,500 calorie per day level in order to get menstrual function to resume, and in order for them to be able to see some of those symptoms go away. So it's very variable. This is of course just the basis, but I appreciate that clarification. It is before exercise calories burned. And thank you, my brain is now going. Other questions? Well, thank you guys, it is 11:55 on the nose.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I saw on Instagram, she messaged me, she's so sweet.
Seems like Katie learned a trick. We hold it down here, it sounds better. Yeah. Can we get another round of applause? We're gonna give her voice a quick break. But she is going to be our lunch keynote, and she's gonna expound on her nutrition journey and how that, how artistic swimming played a piece in all of her life. So she'll be our keynote, but for right now, it is lunchtime. I will do a little housekeeping right before that. First and foremost, you will get this slide. Yeah, right. And then I have a takeaway that I just got from Katie, right?